Aqu- Aquarius now began to gather all his people and put them in tune with the other. For Armageddon, every beginning had an ending. With Aquarius, what went around came around. Aquarius put more people of color into the middle of the island, just to show the Negroes the only way to do what was needed to be done. People of color came doing the same as the English, but with love, for from whence they had come, they had been getting kicked in their ass by the same people too. But they would all profit from teaching the Negroes what they had to do for themselves. For really, the Negroes were the baddest of all, but they were made to believe that for them there was no way out. Aquarius decided to plan for 3 battles. It would then win the war. Thus, something called a World War I took place, thus making the Negroes a bit stronger, a bit wiser. Then a World War II. Armageddon, now beginning to get a bit lightheaded, started to wondering about Aquarius, who had had the atomic power, but now had given it to the English, who were now flying high in the sky. Thought Armageddon, Aquarius surely must not care to win. But now Negroes had begun to start thinking for themselves more. Because there were so many different shades of the people considered to be called Negroes, and this was due to the many rapes and sometimes love affairs of the slave masters imposing themselves on the male and females of color, because owning the people of color as if they were property allowed the slave owner to do as he or she well pleased felt like. They, the Negroes, decided to consider all people of their hue as being called black. That way they could find some kind of common ground as a people and begin what they would consider to be a black nation in a land that seemed very foreign to them as a race of people. Plus, anyone considered to have had as much as a drop of black blood in them was as much considered black as if they had all the black blood in the whole wide world in them, even if they themselves didn't feel black. Therefore, being a victim of it, they all knew what it felt like to be treated black. By now, the Negroes, the black people, began to stir more. Now a bit stronger and wiser, the people of color had just about come to the realization that there was a conquest to be conquered, for they found themselves beneath the privileges that were granted to them just for being alive in the world. When they began learning and understanding just what this strange and bewildering place that they, the blacks, found themselves in was really about, they realized that the future didn't look that good at all for them as a whole group of people, unless they learned the proper way to attack the aggression that was being thrown at them as a whole. Learning to care for their own without depending on some force from outside of their own circumference would just about prepare them, the blacks, for the attack that they would have to make to free themselves from all aggression on the planet once and for all. For the power of the atomic toy was an elimination of 3 resources: money, gun, and oil, which consist of one effect, hate. But Aquarius had done it with love, and all blacks and others had to do now was sit back and wait, for as long as they did not touch the gun right then, they'd come out on top. Armageddon had begun to stumble. Aquarius had given off a radiated heat that Armageddon had gotten used to, and was creating a vibration of music and other sounds with machines that had every man and woman searching his and her religion, seeking to find wisdom and the understanding of love for their fellow man, with an attitude of hate for wrongism. People of Armageddon began to hate the other if they did something wrong to someone, because they felt the pain too. Aquarius now became that much stronger. The English now needed a thing called oil, and they needed it for everything. And all the people of color did was burn up as much as they could, and blacks turned everything into money. They'd sell anything they could get their hands on. That way they could at least collect 2/3 of all the money, learn everything that they could about English businesses, create businesses of their own, and prepare to free themselves from the mental and physical anguish that had been bestowed upon them. For some strange reason, the laws on the books of the English seem as if they were designed for them, the blacks, to catch more hell than anyone on the planet. Blacks, now a bit wiser, a bit stronger, were beginning to understand somewhat as to what type of game was being played on them. After all those years of submission to something that would never be in their favor, it was over. Blacks and other people of color all over the world was ready to attack this new change of thought, thus causing the English to go into a panic. For even people who had aligned themselves with the English as their allies was catching the same hell. Some were catching even more than their share called for. Armageddon began to stumble even more now. People began to travel to both ends of the island by the water, for across it more people of color were coming. Plus, it was where items and goods came into the country first. As the peoples in the black communities began to understand the dynamics of how things operated and began doing something about their situations, instead of waiting for someone else to come and fix it for them, the price of everything began to cost plenty. The blacks just spent more and more money. Besides, it was beginning to be no good anywhere but on the island anyway, and stuff was coming from everywhere, everything but oil, and that was what the English needed to keep their thing going. It seemed to look as if, just like the Dutch, when they were getting no people, there were now too many people, and there was not a way of getting the amount of oil that was needed at the time, and there was no way to scheme on getting any. For money was becoming of no value now, which meant that oil was just about needed to buy oil or something just as good. Armageddon now tried to turn to defense. Heaven had had a taste of sweet fruit and was not any longer willing to do without it, so a move to make. If the English could keep the black in bound with that mental chain that they had given them, mislead them again, and keep them confused, they might stay on their side, Armageddon and the English. For the English were like babies, not wanting to be left alone in their hour of defeat. And like a child with too many toys but afraid of the dark, they wanted someone to stay with them, so they turned to Jesus. A lot of blacks who did not understand what was taking place, and never having had any of the many things that the English had been enjoying for centuries, flourished to stay in the cold, dark dampness so long as they could get what they thought they wanted.